Hi there everyone, my name is Oliver Franzke and I'm the lead programmer of Broken Age. And usually when I talk about game development, I talk about technical aspects of making games. But today I want to talk about a topic that I consider really important and that is often talked about, and that's leadership in the games industry. The title of this presentation is So They Made You a Lead and Now What? So specifically, I want to talk about this time just after you've been promoted into a role with leadership responsibilities and how your job kind of changed and how your responsibilities are different, and what the easiest way is to adjust to these kind of changed role that you have now. And this is important because if you are like most leads in the games industry, then chances are you probably never received any kind of formal training or any kind of preparation for this role as a team lead. Most people, seem to get promoted because they're very strong individual contributors, so they're very good at programming, making art, or designing, and because of that, they're then entrusted with an entire group of people to, program, make an art, or design. And that's great, but it's really tough in a way because, being responsible for people is fundamentally very different from just working on tasks yourself. And one of the most important things to realize is that leadership really requires a very different set of skills that you have to learn. And these are skills that you have to learn in addition to the skills you need as an individual contributor. It might help you to know that most new leads really struggle to adjust to this role. Obviously, there are exceptions for people who have kind of a natural knack for this role, but most people, really require quite some time to become effective as a lead. But the important aspect here is that you can learn these skills and you can become a good lead. I think for the longest time, I thought that leadership is something you really have to be born for or you have to have a natural talent for. But I don't think that's true. You can learn this, and this is where I want to help you with. So the goal for this presentation is, to provide you with kind of a quick start guide of being a lead. And my hope is that it will help you to hit the ground running and be an effective lead much quicker than figuring or running into the same problems that most leads run into and figuring out how to get around it yourself. Before I'm going to talk about specific things, I want to very briefly talk about my own leadership story because I myself experienced all of this firsthand, and I think I really struggled adjusting to this role. And in a way, this really is kind of the reason why I'm talking about it now, because I figured that if I had such problems with adjusting to this role, then it's probably the same for other people, and maybe I can help other people with this adjustment. My leadership story began just shortly after I joined Double Fine Production in San Francisco, when the project lead of Once Upon a Monster, which was a 360 Connect title that we were doing in collaboration with Sesame Street, asked me whether or not I want to be the lead engine programmer. And I was very excited by this question because this is something I always wanted to explore, and I wanted to see whether or not I enjoy the role of being a lead. So I said yes. I wanted to do this, and so I came to the office, sat down in front of the computer with my new role or job title as a lead engine programmer, and I realized that I really had no clue what to do and how my day-to-day job is supposed to be different and what I'm supposed to do now as a lead. As a matter of fact, when I was looking through some old pictures the other day, I found a photo of myself from just that time. Look at that guy. He's all excited, but he really has no clue what to do. And in a way, that's exactly how I felt. Now, after the project was over, I had a bit of time to reflect about my experience, and I realized that if I want to accept another leadership position in the future, I really should take this more serious, and I should learn more about being a lead and what it takes to be a good lead. And the first thing I did is I thought about my different experiences with supervisors in the past. And I noticed that there were some people I really liked and I thought they were doing a very good job as a lead. And there were also some supervisors that I didn't like too much, and I always kind of felt like, they weren't really doing all that good of a job as a team lead. And I started to kind of think about a little bit more like why there was such a difference and what, made these experiences so different. And what I noticed is that for the boss I really liked, I realized that the team morale was generally very high. Everyone in the team really knew where we were going. Everyone was kind of motivated to work on this game, on this project. And for me personally, I always felt that my own contributions were valued a lot. And because of that, I was very motivated to work on my tasks. Now, in contrast to that, the supervisors I didn't like too much. Usually there was a lot of complaining going on in the team, like gossiping, kind of inter-office kind of politics happening and things like that. Usually it wasn't quite clear where we're going, so there was a lot of confusion about what to work on and what people are doing. And for me personally, I always felt that my work wasn't really all that important, and therefore I wasn't really particularly motivated to work on these tasks and kind of was bored because of that. Now, obviously, the question is how to become like that guy. How can we be a good boss? And this is what I want to talk about. So the question of now what definitely arises. And again, hopefully, I will be able to provide you with a whole bunch of points and tools that you can use to hit the ground running as a lead. But first, we should ask ourselves, why is leadership even important in the games industry? Because most companies, have a very flat hierarchy. There's very little in terms of a defined hierarchical structure. And in addition to that, most companies are structured in such a way that you're surrounded by people who are, roughly have the same age that you have kind of similar cultural backgrounds, similar interests. And so it kind of feels like you're just working together with a bunch of buddies and making a game. And it's great, this kind of fun working environment is something that always made me very passionate to stay in the games industry. But on the other hand, it is an industry and companies invest a lot of money to make game projects, and projects become bigger and bigger, more and more people are involved. And in this environment, cooperation, coordination is really, really important for the success of a project. And considering that as a lead in most Western countries, you can't really use kind of authoritative leadership style like you would do in the army, you really have to work hard on becoming an effective lead so that you can make sure that your team and therefore the entire project can be successful. And this is what we want to look at today. So let's start out by looking at some of the responsibilities that were added to your plate. And these are responsibilities that you will have in addition to your responsibilities as an individual contributor. One of the most fundamental and basic responsibilities I think that you have now as a team lead is to establish trust between yourself and your team and also your supervisor. And this is important because when you accept the promotion into a role with leadership responsibilities, you are not a peer anymore. And that means you really have to work very hard on communicating professionally. You can't, gossip anymore or use like excessive sarcasm. These were things that may have been okay before you were promoted, but not anymore now. Because people really look up to you and expect you to be trustworthy. Obviously, if you're somebody who gossips all the time, people, how can people know that you're not going to gossip about them once they leave the room? So establishing this kind of environment of trust is very essential, and it's really important because you want to make sure that people in your team feel very comfortable coming to you even with bad news. Let's assume for a second that someone on your team noticed the problem that will mean you won't be able to hit the next milestone, and maybe it will even affect the entire production schedule for the game. Now, if you're known to your team as somebody who doesn't take bad news well, or who's generally not very approachable, or is always grumpy, then chances are this person might not come to you with this problem, and you're only going to hear about it when it's already way too late and everything is on fire, and that's not a good place to be in. And building trust is something that doesn't happen automatically. You need to work on this, and I'm going to talk about this more later on. Now, in addition to establishing trust, now that you're responsible for an entire group of people, and therefore for the workload of an entire group of people, you're also responsible for setting a direction and specifying goals for your team. And this usually means having kind of a near-term and a long-term plan. Near-term, might be the work or the goals for the next 2 months. and long term maybe for the next year or until the end of a project, depending on how big the project is. And this should really culminate in a very concise vision statement. So let's say for a second you are the lead for a tools programming team. A good vision statement could be this. As a tools team, we want to make sure that all asset updates that get made by the content creators get reflected in the game engine within 10 seconds. This is a great vision statement because it's concise, it's very specific, everyone can understand what this means, and that's awesome. But a vision statement is something you shouldn't just kind of come up with and then keep it on a piece of paper for yourself. This is something you should communicate to your team and in fact the teams around you as well. Everyone should know what the goals are for your group. And it's really important for people on your team because while they are working on day-to-day tasks, they need to make decisions. And knowing the long-term strategy or long-term goal for your team might change how they approach certain decisions. And if they know that they want to be at point A versus point B, they might change how they solve a specific problem. So this is something that you have to do now. And then one thing that I think might be one of your most important responsibilities, though, is to support your team. And in a way, I think I had a little bit of a misconception about that myself in the beginning, because when I thought about leadership, I kind of always thought about a traditional pyramid, where you have the lead at the top and then a whole bunch of people underneath it doing the work. But in reality, I think it's completely different. As a lead, you're really there to hold up your team, to make sure they can be as successful as possible and that they can successfully reach the goals you specified for the team. And supporting your team might be as simple as just making sure that everyone has hardware and software they need. But it could also mean that you have to provide guidance for someone with how to approach a certain task, or maybe somebody's struggling on your team with achieving kind of the work performance. And this is something, again, where you need to work on helping your team and making sure that they can do the best job they can possibly do. Now, some of you might ask this question now, but what about my actual job? And this is actually a question I heard quite a lot when I talk to leads and former leads. And like stuff that I usually heard is, I really like being a lead and I really like being involved in some more bigger and important decisions. But with all these extra meetings and helping people, I really don't know when I'm supposed to do my actual job. And I think this might be the biggest misconception about leadership that there is in the games industry. Because as a team lead, leadership is your actual job. If there's only one thing you take away from this presentation, then it's really this. Leadership is your actual job now. And that means you will obviously spend more time in meetings, talking to people, writing reviews, writing documents, and like you can definitely expect to spend between 20 to 50% on leadership and management tasks. And so this is really important for you to know, because when you give yourself kind of normal project tasks, don't overcommit yourself. Make sure to allocate only 50% of your time for regular tasks. Because if you just accept too much work yourself, you will, you might, do a lot of overhours and then you're stressed out. And because of that, you might not be as approachable as the lead as you should be. And you generally kind of then fall behind in your leadership responsibilities. So don't do that. But what can you do to become an actual lead? Like, what are the specific tools? And the first thing we have to learn, unfortunately, is that there is no single secret to become a good lead. Despite what some people claim on the internet, there is no real easy 10-step program that transforms you from an individual contributor into the most awesome lead that ever existed. In fact, the only formula that I can agree with is this from Mike Acton that he mentioned at GDC in 2015, when he said, "If you absolutely must have a formula for doing your leadership work, here's mine. Figure out what doesn't work and do less of that. Figure out what works well and do more of that." And this really resonates with me because just like other things in life, I think you're never done becoming a lead. Even after you've been, in a leadership position for years, you still have to take a step back and kind of reflect on your performance and see if what you're doing is effective and if there are things that you can do differently to approach this role. So with that in mind, let's talk about specific things you can do to become a good lead. And one thing, or the first thing you should do after you've been promoted into a role with leadership responsibilities is to find a mentor. And a mentor is someone who you really respect for his or her leadership abilities. So this doesn't necessarily need to be your direct supervisor. Again, coming back to the example of a tools programming lead, if you're that person, but you notice someone in the art department is doing a fantastic job leading a group of people, and everyone is really motivated, and generally, this team is producing a fantastic amount of work, then I encourage you to go to this person and ask him or her whether or not it's okay to come up with questions about leadership every once in a while. Because this kind of practical advice will really help you, and you will be able to benefit from the experiences that this person has. But even if you feel like there's no one in your organization that you can talk to, I encourage you to reach out to somebody else in the games industry that you think is doing a good job as a lead. Like, for example, the Australian game developer Zach Duff did, when he sent an email to John Romero to ask about how to be a lead, and who then responded. And this definitely reflects my own experience, because after I realized that I need to work on becoming a good lead and take this more serious, I spent a lot of time talking with my tech director at work and also sending emails with specific questions to people in the games industry. And they generally were very, very helpful and very generous with their time. And I think I really learned a lot through these conversations. Now, it should probably not come as a big surprise that communication is very important when you're a lead. In fact, if you're not communicating, you can't lead. So this is a key skill, and you will really have to work on becoming an effective communicator. Now, for some people, this is less of a struggle than for others. I know that for myself, this was certainly quite a struggle. I had to learn a lot of new things. And so you should really kind of work on making sure that the information you present is kind of clear and concise. And always bear in mind that you might have to present information in a different way depending on who you talk to. And always keep in mind, this will take way more time than you think. So again, don't overcommit yourself with actual tasks. And one thing that I think new leads sometimes kind of not necessarily do right is that it's okay to not know everything. If somebody comes to you with a question, I think sometimes as a new lead you feel a bit of a pressure that you kind of feel like you have to know everything, but that's not really true. If there's something you're not quite sure about, just say, okay, I don't really know this myself, I will talk to the people who know and then I'm going to get back to you. So make sure to kind of not, say half-truths and stuff like that. Now, the other aspects of being an effective communicator, first of all, if you see something that's broken that needs to be changed, don't wait for somebody else to mention it or do something about it. Be proactive. If it's something you can do yourself, fix these problems yourself. If it's something that you can't do yourself, make sure to mention it to someone in the studio leadership level so that something can be changed there. Now, in addition to that, being transparent, I think, is really a key aspect, especially when you're a lead. And this, I'm specifically referring to the situation when things go wrong, for example. Again, let's say, someone in your team found a problem and you now notice that you won't be able to get all the stuff done for the next milestone. I think sometimes as a new lead, you kind of feel like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't mention this. Maybe if I just work doubly as hard, maybe we can solve this problem. Don't do that. Make sure to mention these things if things go wrong to the people who will be affected, and work on finding a solution. But do let people know, because nothing is worse than kind of not knowing about a problem that was you could have known about. And then lastly, it's really important to be clear. People can't read your mind. So if there's something you want to say or when you want to communicate, make sure to really explicitly say what you mean, and don't, write kind of hidden messages and try to beautify certain things. That's really important. Now, one thing that I probably underestimate a lot is how important listening is. There's a saying that as a human you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should use them in that ratio, and I think that is definitely true for leadership. Listening and becoming an effective listener is very, very important because it helps you to gather information. And in my mind, I think when I thought about leadership before I was promoted, I always thought as a lead, you're standing in front of a group of people and you're giving these kind of inspiring speeches. And because of your awesome words, people run off and do fantastic work. And that's obviously not quite the way it is. In a way, listening is actually way more important than actually talking. And there are 2 specific techniques I found very, very helpful, and I want to share them with you. First of all, you should work on asking more open-ended questions. And open-ended questions are questions that can't be easily answered with yes or no. And these are questions that essentially invite your communication partner to elaborate a bit more about what you're talking about. And with that, you are able to extract way more information than you would with just getting yes or no. Because the what and why are really, really important. Let's look at a specific example, though. So here in this example, there's a new feature that was requested, and someone in your team has to work on this. So you can ask this question in an open-ended form like that. What do you think about this feature, and how long will it take to implement? Now compare this to the closed version. We are going to add this feature. Can you get it done this sprint? Now, the difference might seem subtle in the beginning, but asking this as a closed form essentially means that you're dumping some work on someone's plate and just asking whether or not they will be able to get it done. And obviously, there's not much they can say at this point. They can say, yes, I will be able to get it done, or no, I already have too much work, I won't be able to get it done. But this person probably is not going to feel very involved or very motivated to work on this because it's just extra work. Now, if you ask us an open-ended question, you're essentially inviting your communication partner to work with you on scoping this feature, and you're asking his advice or his opinion on this feature because maybe this person knows about why this feature doesn't work very well in this context, or maybe there's something, a problem that you're not aware of, why this feature doesn't even make sense. And this will definitely help you to get way more information out of people, and I think it's a very, very good technique, and after a while it really becomes natural to ask questions like this. Now, the other listening technique that I found very effective is active listening. And active listening is a communication technique that helps in situations where potential miscommunications can happen. And so this technique becomes specifically helpful in difficult conversations. Maybe something went wrong and people blaming each other and emotions are running high. And so it's essential for conflict resolution. And the idea behind this technique is to repeat what your communication partner says back to him or her using your own words. And this will allow your communication partner to hear what you think they said. And if there's any disconnect between the message that they were trying to tell you and the message that you received and that you heard, then they can resolve this miscommunication right away. And this will mean that you won't spend half an hour talking about completely different things, only then to realize, oh wait, the premise of this conversation is actually very, very different. And both of these listening techniques become very, very helpful, in fact essential for one of the most important things you can do as a lead, and that's one-on-one meetings. And one-on-one meetings are important because now that you are responsible for an entire group of people, you really have to know these people in order to be able to effectively lead them. And this also, as I said earlier, means that you have to establish this kind of trust between yourself and the team. And one-on-one meetings are the key tool to do this. The idea behind one-on-one meetings is that you meet with everyone on your team on a regular basis, maybe once a month. There's a bit of different opinions than the industry, how often it should be. Figure out what works well for you and do it like that. And In these conversations, you're going to talk about kind of personal topics and kind of essentially the goal is to get to know your team much better. Now, it's important to not skip these meetings, even if it feels like there's not much to talk about. It's okay to have a short meeting, but skipping entirely will just mean that it's the more likely that you will just like completely stop doing these kind of meetings. Now, it's important to pick a location for these meetings where both of you can feel comfortable talking about potentially sensitive topics. So obviously a meeting room in your office is a great place, but you could also go to a coffee shop nearby, as long as neither of you have to be worried about somebody else kind of walking in on this conversation and overhearing things that he or she shouldn't hear. Now, something that's very often misinterpreted in my own experience in the games industry is about what you should talk about specifically in one-on-one meetings. And the most important aspect here is this is not a status update. The core conversation of this meeting should not be about the current task load and whether or not it will be done by the end of the week. It should be about questions like, do you enjoy what you're working on? Is there anything you would prefer to work on? Is there anything you would like to learn? Is there a course you want to go to? Where do you want to be in 5 years? If there's one thing you could change in this project, what would that be? These kind of questions are the questions that you want to ask your team member. And again, the idea is to get to know your team very well, because only then you will be able to effectively lead them. Now, one thing that's really important if you have these meetings, make sure that you're really there. And I don't just mean physically, actually mentally. Be there and concentrate on this conversation. Don't allow distractions. So don't have this meeting in front of a computer where you can see email notifications happening. If you have to take your phone into this meeting, turn it off or mute it or whatever you need to do so that you can concentrate on this conversation. The idea is obviously to make sure that you make the other person feel important and valued, because that is essentially what should happen. And if there are specific things that you agree on in terms of action items, make sure to take notes and then send these notes as a summary to the team member you talk to, so you both have kind of like a written form of what you talked about, and you can kind of look up later on what you discussed specifically. Now, another thing that is really difficult potentially to get used to in the beginning as a new lead, I think, is how to deal with expectations. And I think it's really, really important as a lead to set very clear expectations. And this is important because it's actually going to help your team and yourself. And this is not micromanagement. It's not about like specifying very specific algorithms for people to execute or something like that. It's about making sure to let people know what is important to you. And to essentially avoid a situation where work gets done in a way that would frustrate you. Because nothing is worse than telling someone after they delivered some work that to go back and change something just because they didn't know that it was supposed to be done in a different way. And so make sure to do this. And if it helps you to write this down, then create a list of specific things that are important to you. As a programmer, this could mean, for example, writing up all the kind of coding standards that are important to you. And this is really helpful, but again, as a new lead, this might feel a bit weird in the beginning, but it's something that will definitely help you. So you should do that. Now, obviously, there's the matter of work, and now that you are responsible for an entire group of people, you also have all the work, or you're responsible for all the work of the entire group of people, and obviously you won't be able to do it all yourself. So you have to learn how to delegate things. Now, one thing that I think helps a lot in the beginning as a new lead is to have kind of sprint planning meetings. And the idea here is to get the entire team in the meeting room, and then you first talk about all the things that kind of got done during the previous sprint, and specifically also the things that didn't get done and why they didn't get done during the previous sprint, before talking about all the things that need to get done, for the next sprint or the milestone or whatever. And at this point, you can invite people to essentially grab tasks that they want to work on. And this should hopefully lead to a situation where there's a very kind of natural work distribution happening, and people hopefully gonna get mostly tasks that they're excited to work on. Now, obviously, there will be tasks that nobody wants to do, and you'll have to assign these. And you could assign them to yourself, of course, but again, make sure to not give yourself too much work. This is important. Now, one thing that is kind of important about delegation is that it goes further than just kind of distributing work to your team. Your team is essentially are the people who work on the tasks on a day-to-day basis and might know way more about the specific details of what they're working on than you do. So your team are essentially the domain expert, and because of that, you should make sure that to delegate kind of scoping and questions from other departments to your team as well. And this is something I did wrong in the beginning, I think, where I remember a very specific instance where somebody from the audio department came to me and asked me a question about the constraints of the audio system. Now, I don't usually work in the audio system on a day-to-day basis, but I had enough knowledge to answer this question, and I thought, oh, okay, I should probably not disrupt the team with this question, and I just answered myself, and that's what I did. What I didn't realize, though, at this point is that the person who is working on the audio system all the time overheard this question and my answer, and for this person it seemed like I didn't trust this person with this question, and which was obviously not my intention, and definitely led to a situation where it kind of reduced the morale of this person. So bear this in mind as well, like these things are part of delegating work to your team. And then the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to delegation is that it's actually a great tool for skill development. So let's assume for a second that you are a lead for an art group, and one of the tasks for your next milestone is to model an orc. Now, you could give this task to somebody who's already modeled a whole bunch of orcs for the previous game, but maybe you just recently hired a new artist, and from your one-on-one meetings, you learned that this person is very enthusiastic about character modeling and really wants to learn more about it. And if time permits, then you might at this point actually give this task to the more junior artist. Because, this person is very excited about it and obviously wants to learn about it, and is probably going to be very passionate working on this task. And while working on this task, this person might learn a whole bunch of new skills that will later on become very, very helpful for other things. Because generally people don't really like to do repetitive tasks. So if somebody has already done a certain type of work in the past a whole bunch of times, then they're probably not going to be too excited to work on this over and over again. And you probably notice that with yourself, where you're probably most happy when you have the feeling that you're learning something new and you're working on something interesting, you have a challenge. So as a team lead, it's your responsibility to make sure that people on your team grow and kind of develop new skills, because you're also responsible for the success of your team in the future, not just in the present. So now that all the tasks are distributed, your job as a lead is obviously not done. As a team lead, you are representing your team, and that means that you have to know not just what your own task load is, but also kind of what the overall progress is for your entire team, because you're probably going to be in project meetings and stuff like that, where you have to know kind of where what the entire team is doing. And I'm mentioning this specifically because I think at this point a lot of new leads run into this quote-unquote actual job problem, where they kind of have the feeling now that everyone is working, I really should also sit down and do a whole bunch of work. And so it's kind of easy to forget about leadership responsibilities. But it is important to check in, and there are different ways of doing that too. I know that some people kind of like to read per first commit messages and stuff like that to kind of follow up on what's happening. If you have a producer going around and kind of checking on everyone on the team anyway, have a coffee with the producer and figure out what's happening this way. Or, of course, you could just walk around yourself and figure out what's happening this way. And this has the added benefit that you're not just going to learn about the progress that your team is making, but you'll hopefully also hear about any kind of potential problems that people run into. And, you might, because of that, you might be able to resolve these before they become a bigger issue. So one of the most difficult things that you'll have to learn, probably as a new lead, is the importance of providing feedback and how to provide feedback. And I kind of want to talk about both providing negative feedback and positive feedback. So let's start out with criticism. So now that you are responsible for an entire group of people, that also means you're responsible if something goes wrong. So let's assume for a second that someone on your team keeps breaking the build, and you, despite the fact that you mentioned in the past that this is not a good thing, it will actually stop the entire team from doing work. And you even provided tools how to get around this problem by, for example, checking the changes locally before committing it to the build server. But despite all your efforts, this still keeps happening. Now, this is your responsibility. You have to deal with this. And yes, this won't be a fun conversation, but you have to have this conversation. And don't put this off. Don't let small problems become bigger and bigger. If there's something that's going wrong, attack it right away and solve it, because it's just going to become more complicated and difficult later on. Now, one thing that is really important is to have these kind of meetings or discussions in private and not in public. Because if you approach someone with criticism, let's say, in public where all of his colleagues are, then this person is probably going to be in a natural defensive stance and going to be worrying most about not losing respect in front of his or her colleagues. So instead, get a meeting room in the office and have this conversation there. And always remember, have these conversations with empathy, approach these situations with empathy. Because there might be something going on that you're not aware of. Maybe this person has some problems in his or her personal life that affects also work performance. So, make sure to be sensitive to these kind of things. Because obviously, let's say your kid isn't turning in English homework on time, you're not going to threaten your kid with firing him or her from the family, right? Instead, you're hopefully going to say, hey, I heard from your teacher that you're not turning in your English homework. What is going on? Is there any way I can help you with this? So that we get out of this situation. And this is exactly how you should approach this situation as well. Work together with your team member on this problem. First, figure out what is actually going on, what's the reason for this, and then come up with a plan of how to improve the situation. And after you have a plan, obviously take notes, write this down, share this plan with the team member you talk to via email, so you both know exactly what you're working on. And then afterwards, make sure to follow up on the progress and make sure to kind of check in and see how things are going and be as supportive as possible. Because again, as a team lead, you're responsible to support your team. This is one of your core responsibilities, so take this serious. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, there's obviously also praise. And I think sometimes new leads struggle with praise because maybe they feel like as a lead, they kind of need to kind of want to show that they have authority now, and they kind of concentrate on all the negative things and pointing out things that are not going well and kind of forget to provide praise. But praise is actually really, really important because it affects team morale quite a lot. Because if you provide a lot of praise, it's going to boost team morale and people are going to be motivated to work on their tasks. And in contrast to criticism, praise can and should be provided in public. So for example, maybe you have kind of a whole project meeting where you kind of talk about what your team did last week. At this point, it's a good place to talk about accomplishments that your team did. Now, if you think, oh, I never remember at this point kind of the things that happened, then something that I found very helpful is to have a piece of paper next to the computer and kind of write down all the good things that happened during the week. And this is actually great because at the end of the week, I guarantee you have a nice list of things, all the awesome things that happen. And it's going to make you feel good because you see all this awesomeness happening and you have now a list of things that you can talk about during the next meeting. And, always remember, like little words like, well done, great job, make a huge difference. And don't forget to praise people. Whew. That's a lot. Now, if you heard all this, you might ask yourself, man, this leadership thing seems really, really hard. And yes, let's not talk around it. Like learning leadership or getting used to a role with leadership responsibilities is really, really tough. But it isn't impossible. You can become a good lead by making sure that you do these things and flexing your leadership muscles. Brian Sharp said in his GDC presentation in 2012 that there's a misconception that comprehension equals mastery, where that clearly is not the case. Just because you read all the books or saw the presentation and things like that, just because you know all these things doesn't necessarily mean that you're also a great team lead. And another thing that Brian said in his presentation that I really like and really resonates with me is that instead of hoping to be just like this great team lead that you are inspired by, instead of hoping, just work on this, like practice being a lead, like work on these kind of things, see what works for you and change your strategy. But just working on your leadership abilities will make sure that you become a great team lead. And this is really just the beginning. All the things I talked about today are really just kind of the most basic fundamental things that you'll need to know as a lead. And now that you've been promoted in this role, this is an exciting step in your career. This is something, that will provide you with a lot of opportunities, and that is generally a really awesome time, and it can be very overwhelming, but I hope that with some of the things I talked about today, you will be able to get used to this role much, much faster. And this is really all I have time to talk about today. So again, I hope this helped you a little bit. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email or hit me up on Twitter or whatever. And that's it. Thank you very much, guys. And there are a few resources I have that you might want to check out as well. So I'm just gonna show you these slides in silence. Thank you. Bye.